Hello everyone, and welcome to my UDK tutorial series. In this episode I'm going to be going over kind of how to make your own cinematics slash animations. I say slash animations because you can make things move around in the level without them actually having to be quote unquote on cinematic. Like you can make doors open or boxes tumble over or sparks fly or the lights flicker, whatever you want, without the player still actually be interacting with the level themselves. So they don't actually have to be camera cinematics with a camera flying around showing you things, or the game manually controlling the player while it shows something happen. But it's not also an animation program like 3ds Max or Blender. So keep that in mind. You can kind of animate simple objects, but anyway, what I've kind of got planned to kind of show how all this is going to be working is essentially just a simple opening door kind of simulation thing. Nothing major, but I had a lot of fun messing around with it whenever I was first messing with this, so hopefully you can kind of enjoy it. And it's really simple to understand, so you can take the kind of opening door thing and apply it to other things, and it'll work just the same way. So to get started, we actually need something in the level to animate slash cinematize. Cinematize, that's fun. So I've already got door typed in here. I'm just going to select the static meshes, and I'm going to be using these great big blast door things right here. So I'm going to go ahead and drag those out. And if you don't have these at all, then you need to make sure that you selected the install the game add-on thingy-majigger whenever you actually downloaded UDK, because that adds all of these fancy meshes. So now that we've got these in here, let me just spin you around like that. Spin you around like that. And then just get here. Now, as you can see, I've kind of made like a big valley crevasse thingy-majigger that we can kind of put these doors between so that we can have something to, try to get through, just for the effect of it. Now, I'm not going to worry about getting these, doors perfectly positioned, and normally I would build some sort of door frame, but in this case, I don't want to spend too much time on making it look really nice, and more time on actually, making sure that everyone can follow what I'm doing. So let me just get these like this. Now what I'm going to do is move this over so that it's kind of locked in like that, because these doors, if you notice, are kind of made to be kind of locked in like that. Now what I think I'm going to do actually is kind of rotate them either inwards or outwards, either one. And instead of moving them to the side, now we could really do either way, and I'll probably show you both ways, but we're just going to kind of animate them opening up somehow with sound added, and it's just kind of be a cool little thing that it does that whenever we move close to it. So to get started, we want to actually go ahead and create a matinee. So if we go into Kismet real quick, right click anywhere and click new matinee, we can get one of these, and that's about the only thing that we actually have to do in matinee, or Kismet rather. I always say Kismet or matinee, meaning the other, and I mean that in my head, and I say the wrong thing. So I do apologize if I keep, using their phrases the wrong way. I really shouldn't, but I just get mixed up sometimes. This right here is Kismet. This, it's minimized. This right here is matinee. So hopefully you guys can keep what I'm saying straight. All right. Now, once we have matinee open, we need to be able to reference these objects that we're going to want to be animating. And I'm going to be saying animating by just moving them around, but I don't really mean animating in the sense that you would, do something in like 3ds Max, okay? I just want to make sure that people don't I don't want people to be going into this thinking that they can like animate complex skeletal mesh movements and like facial expressions in this, and then they can't, and they say, well, you said it was an animator. No, I said it's a cinematic / simple animator, okay? But I'm going to use the term animating in this case because it's easier than saying cinematizing, which I don't even think is a word, but it's kind of fun to say. Anyways, all right, so we need to we need to have this object selected and then right-click in here and add a new empty group. Now this you could call anything you want. You could call it Bob, George, you could name it Jerry if you wanted to. This just needs to be something that you can look at and say, oh, I know what that is. It doesn't matter what you call it. The game doesn't care. It's not really going to be referencing what you call it. It's just going to be kind of referencing what's inside of it. This just is for you to be able to look at and know what it is. So I'm going to do door right and click OK. And for the next part, we need to add a movement track. So because see, we can add all kinds of different tracks that can be going on with like one specific object that we could be doing. So you can have all these kinds of things that you could be doing, and that's kind of why we have these folders essentially, so that you can kind of either sort them by object, or in some cases, some objects don't even require you to have them, accessed in level. You can just kind of have different things down here. So you can just kind of have all these names of things and then all these different tracks that are doing different things with that object or other objects. So we can just click movement track, and then it's going to give us this error. Now I did know this error was going to occur. I just preferred to actually show the error so people would understand, what's wrong. Because I've had this happen so many times that I've just had it ingrained in my brain to know how to fix this ahead of time. Now, in case you can't see it on YouTube, this says that, warning, the track you are creating requires a dynamic actor, but the currently active group is using a static actor. Are you sure you want to create the track, yes or no? Now, I'm going to click no, and I'm going to delete this. Now, essentially what has happened, if I do go to here and we have the properties, we have a static mesh. And a static mesh is just that. It's static, meaning it can't really move. It can, but it doesn't really like to because it's called a static mesh. It's like asking a turtle to run 100 miles an hour. It's not really possible, but it's... So we have to kind of convert the turtle to a cheetah in this case, so that it can move around. So what we can do easily is now there is way to actually just import this directly as an interp or K-actor or whatever you want to do. If we have the object still selected in the content browser, we can just right click and we can just add it in right here. So you can see that the object we have still selected in the content browser is here, and we can add it in as different things. And the thing that we would want is interp actor right here. It stands for interpolation actor. And so we could just re-add it in, but that's complicated. We'd have to reposition it. So what I'm going to do is just convert this. Now, not replace with, okay, I've accidentally clicked that a couple times. That just replaces it with a different mesh. You don't want to do that. You want to go to convert. And we can just do either K-actor or mover. Now, I prefer mover because you have to do a couple extra things to K-actor to get it to work. So if we just do mover, and then it's going to give us, we can't do this in the current editor mode because we're in Unreal Matinee and not in the camera mode. So now that we exit that, we're back in the camera mode. And then we can convert this to a mover. And we can click continue. And it hasn't really changed its appearance at all. But if we right click this, you can see we now have an interp actor. Okay. Now do note that its physics, okay, are interpolating. That is very important. You don't want to change this if you're going to be referencing it in Matinee. You don't want to change this because it will give you an error and it won't run right. It actually won't run at all. You can reference it in Matinee, put out a bunch of points everywhere, and do this fancy animation, and then say you add sound to it, and you walk up and try to activate it, the sounds will play, but it won't move at all because it's not interpolating. So you have to make sure it is on that. Now with a K actor, you have to make sure you actually set it to that. So I'll just show you. I'm going to convert this other one to a K actor. So we have a K actor on this one. Now its physics by default is rigid body. So you want to change that to interpolating, which is why I prefer to use an interp actor, because it just sets that by default as interpolating. So I'm just going to move this to a mover. And now we both have two interp actor. Interactor. Okay, so now that that's covered, we can go back into Kismet, delete this so that it's not referencing that anymore, and then we can go in here. Now we could have just deleted it in here as well. Either way works, but I just did it in there because I wanted to. Now we're referencing this left door now, so I'm going to do door left and click OK, and then I'm going to click over this one, do door right, door, right, okay, and then just add movement tracks to both of these. Pretty simple. Now, one thing you want to make sure that you understand, okay, is this first point here, okay, don't move this at all, because what'll happen is Matinee will start to play its animation. It'll say, oh, you're at this location right now. Like, we can't really move this in the world either. Like, if I were to say, you know, I exit out of Matinee and I try to just move this just by itself, you know, down somewhere else, well, Matinee is going to say, okay, you're supposed to be in this location at the start, and you're not. So I'm now confused as to what to do, and the animation will look all wonky. So you want to make sure that you don't move the first point, and you also don't move it in the world. So if I exit out of Matinee right now, I don't want to move this right now either. So I don't want to do like, you know, this or something, because that would mess everything up. So I'll just do Control Z so I move it back to where it's supposed to be. So the first point and its position in the world are set. So you want to make sure that that is its default location as you want it to be in the world, and you don't want to move it at all. You only want to move it through other points that are set in the animation. Now I'm going to go to about, well, let's make this kind of a longer animation, cinematic thingy-majigger. So I can just drag this kind of red triangle over. Now you do need to make sure you drag it all the way if you have snapping enabled, which I do. I prefer to have it at 0.5 seconds. So you need to make sure you drag it all the way before it actually snaps over. So I'm going to drag this kind of to about 10, just kind of dragging this white bar here. You can also drag in here. I just prefer to use the white bar as a preference thing. And I'm going to drag this all the way over here, and I want to set it. I'm going to put my cursor here. Okay, now I do have snapping, so it's going to. It doesn't really matter where I put this too much. It's going to snap to the nearest half second whenever I add a new key anyway. But I'm going to hit Enter. Or if you remember from my last tutorial about the GUI of this thing, I can click up here, hit Enter, and I have a new key point here. Now remember, it's just the door right. It's not the door left. We haven't done anything with the door left yet. Okay, but if I just kind of come out of here, now what I want to do is set the position that it's going to move to. That's all I have to do. Matinee will take care of everything in between. It will take care of moving it from point A to point B. You just have to set the position that you want it to move to. Now, we have this set to curved auto clamp by default. I'll talk about that in a minute, but this can also come into play of how it's moving it. But at any rate, it's still going to get to point B, and we want it to kind of go inside the wall so we can get by. So we can just kind of move it into here, maybe about to there, so we can still kind of see some part of the door. Now, all we need to do is just click on the movement track for this one up here, and then we don't even have to change this where the position of this is. We just hit Enter again, and it just adds a point right up here. Okay, so it's pretty simple. I'm going to move this to the other side and do the exact same thing. Just kind of move it all the way in, and there we go. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind is that this wheel thing is not really designed to kind of go into the wall like this, but I'm just doing this for kind of simple demonstration. You want to be aware of things like this whenever you're making cinematics like this, because people will notice that and they'll be like, yeah, it kind of looks wonky. So just kind of keep in mind what your mesh looks like whenever you're doing it, especially the front and all the different sides, because it may look weird from different angles that you didn't anticipate. And if the player is looking directly at this as this goes into the wall, it can kind of look odd because there's not really a space for it to go into. Now, you could pretend, you can kind of just think that there is just a space for this door to go into, because a lot of the time these doors are just kind of, there's an open space behind it in the wall that you can't really see, and it just kind of slides in there. But there's obviously not an open space for this wheel to go into, so it looks kind of weird. But we're going to ignore that for now, and we're just going to go back to the 0 point here. And do note, I can just kind of click anywhere I want, and the animation just progresses to that point. So we can kind of troubleshoot different areas, get an idea of what it looks like at that still moment of time. So we can kind of, keep an eye over everything in our animation. But I'm going to play this at normal speed. I have my speed adjusters up here. And I'm going to click play. You can alternatively hit space as well. I'm going to just move this onto my other window so you guys can kind of see this a little better. So I'm going to hit spacebar. And this, whoops, I was not clicking on the right thing. Click in here. Okay, let me just, there. Okay, now it should work. Okay, so we're just kind of moving slowly apart. And it's going to accelerate a little bit, and then it's going to kind of slow down and come to a stop. Very slowly and nice. So there we have it. We have some doors opening. So pretty cool. Really is pretty cool, actually. And it's about a 10-second animation. So it's long, but it gives us a good amount of time to be able to kind of observe some good things that I'm going to be doing with the spline thing here in a minute. So we could add more points in here to make it, do fancy things. We could add a point in here where maybe one of the doors stops, kind of goes back a little bit, stops again, like it's, stuttering, and then kind of slams into the edge of the thing. But that just requires a couple different key points. And I may do that near the end just to kind of show what that would look like. But really, that's about all it is to it. The very, very basics of doing the cinematic stuff in UDK. You just do a bunch of key points and set it up like that, and it's pretty simple, really. Now there's a couple more things I'm going to go over, like the curve editor. It's really neat. I haven't messed around with it too much in practicality, but it is pretty neat, and I'm going to start using it more. So there are a couple things that I myself am a little unfamiliar with, so I do apologize. But at any rate, I'm going to, for the door left, if you look right here, it may be hard to see. Right about here, there's like this little black dot. If I click that, it's going to pull up the curve. There it is. Okay. Now, obviously, we're going to have to kind of scroll around to be able to see much of it. So what I'm going to do is just click the Fit View to All button, and then we have the whole thing played out here. There we go. So I select this point, and now this is highlighted, and I can start playing around with things. Now, essentially, this is just depicting how this is moving along on the x-axis, it looks like. Now, this is, if you're any good at, geometry and math, on the Cartesian coordinate plane, then this is going to make a lot of sense to you. This is essentially the graph of this movement of this door. Now, we also have another one of these. I didn't point it out before, but we kind of have this like linear line showing us where this is moving. Now, due to the way that it's actually doing this door, it's actually starting at this edge and then going to the position of this other edge over here. It's not from the center, but it's just kind of showing where this is moving. It doesn't really have any arrows, but I mean, if we had this moving up and then rotating, it would actually update in 3D space and just track that one edge section as it moved around in 3D space and how it was moving. However, this just kind of shows it in a 2D space, but it gives us some different kind of information, also about how kind of like the speed. The other one was a straight line because it's just moving in a straight line, but in this we can see it has a little bit more fluidity to it. It's a little more dynamic. And as I noted, as we were watching the initial play out of the animation, it kind of slowly came to a start and then sped up some and then slowed down and came to a complete stop. And that's why I wanted to draw this out for a long amount of time so you could really see that. So I'm going to play it again and pay attention to that as I play this out. And you can also, if I can get this to show up, there we go. So I'm going to have this simultaneously up here, and you can kind of glance back and forth as this kind of plays out so you can see kind of what it's doing. So if I hit play here, so you can see it's going to kind of get to its point of constancy, and then it's going to kind of slow to a stop. So I'll play it one more time. So that's why I kind of have it playing out so long, so you kind of really see that. So there it is. So this is kind of showing that. Now this linear line, of course, doesn't show that at all, but if we had this moving in another direction, like, you know, if we had this moving downwards as well, this line would be able to show us that. This, we would have a little harder time depicting that because it would be several lines. So they both have their uses. Now, what good does this do? I mean, sure, we can see this, but, you know, okay, I don't really see why they would spend time putting this into a program just so we could see this happening. Well, you can edit this. So if I click like on one of these ends, like say this one here, I'm going to get this little bitty white dot right here. And if I click on this and start dragging it, you can see now I'm getting this line. Now this is actually going to make it move in a separate direction. Okay, which is why I was talking about we would have separate lines. So if I click at the beginning, this is going to make it move in a different direction. Okay, this is not going to make it move differently. It's not going to deviate going to the end here. Okay, but if I actually go ahead and play this now, you'll see that this line has changed. It's now going to be going like dipping down and doing fancy stuff. So it's going to like dip down into the floor and then it's going to come back up. And it's going to be a nice graceful line, but it still looks weird. So let me undo this. Okay, so that's fixed. So at the beginning, editing that is just going to give you a different fancy looking line. Now it would be much easier to just do that with the actual initial placement of where you want the object to go instead of editing with this, because you have a lot less control this way. You can't really control how far down it goes. So it's best to go into the key points, edit the key point, click here, go in here and, you know, edit where you want it to, you know, not at the beginning, but at the end here, edit where you want it to actually appear, and then go in here and edit these a little bit. Okay, that's kind of the best way to approach this. But anyway, if I go to the end, okay, I can get another white dot, and then I can kind of edit this. So what this is essentially going to do is this is going to make it go actually to the left some, because it's actually rising up from the point. It can kind of be a little hard to understand if you're not used to looking at graphs and understanding kind of the math behind how these graphs are working. Essentially, you want to think of this. This is the starting point, and this is the end point. Going to the right and down is going to be going to the end point. Going to the right, okay, if it's straight line, it's not changing its position. Going down is changing its position because we have we have time at the bottom, and we have position on the left. Okay, so if we go up, we're going the opposite from where we want to go down. So it's essentially going to go to the left, and then it's going to go very quickly down to the right. So let's look at this now. So if I set the spec to 0, it's actually moving slightly to the left, or to the right in this case. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. And then it's going to move very quickly back to the left. So it's going to the right and then to the left. I got them mixed up between the two. I thought we were looking at the other one. Anyway, once again, it's not going very much to the right. It's moving very slowly, but it did move some. So, and then it's moving back. So that's kind of how that works. And we can kind of move that around, and we can do fancy things with this. Now we can also click this end and then set it to one of these other modes, and then click the other end and set it to the same mode, and it'll set those. Now we have to actually set both ends of it, otherwise it won't change at all. So that's kind of something you need to make sure you do, because I was having issues whenever I first kind of learning about this. I was doing it wrong, and I was like not clicking the right thing, and it wasn't working. I was like, ugh. So, but just make sure you click both ends and set it to something. So if I wanted it to be linear, I could set that end, and I don't have to set this end. But if it doesn't, sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. So if you click one end and set it, and it does it, then that's fine. Don't worry about it. If you click one end, set it, and it doesn't work, just go to the other end and set it the same thing, and then it should work. Because sometimes both ends will get set to something, and then you have to unset both ends. Anyway, so now we have a linear path, okay? And I'm going to kind of go ahead and go over the different kinds. Now do note, as we're changing them, if we change it to a specific kind of path, okay, it changes in the thing down here. Now, so we have a linear path here, but this one's not actually set to linear. So if I set it to linear, it'll update to green. Okay. But in this case, we didn't really have to do both, because the first one is set to linear, so it kind of just auto sets the other one to linear anyway. But if we had more than one, it would matter. And I'll go ahead and add a third later on in here, so we can kind of see what it would look like. But it is green, so you can tell just by looking at this what kind of things that they are. Now, if I set it to as I set these to different things, you can kind of look and see what color that they are, so you can kind of be familiar with that. But we have linear. Now this is not going to be the curved auto clamp of before. Before we had this nice kind of curving line. This is just a straight path. This is going to accomplish what we want, the door to be moving, but it's going to kind of accelerate like all of a sudden, and it won't be very noticeable at all. It'll be kind of, it'll look slightly odd, but it won't be really that bad looking, because it's just going to, move in a straight path, but it's going to accelerate literally from 0 to the speed that it is. It's not going to do a slow gradual acceleration like pretty much most objects in the world do. And then it's not going to do a slow gradual stop. So in the case of a door, you want a curved auto clamp, like nice curved line, and not a linear path. But in the case of some other objects, linear paths might be good if you want them to be, linear and kind of just all of a sudden just start going without much acceleration. And I mean, you don't even have to have this for the whole thing. Again, I'll show you in a moment in a case where we can have a partially linear path and then, a nice curved line thing. So there's linear. We have constant. Now, this is one of those cases we're going to have to kind of click at a certain point. There. Okay, so now we don't have any lines at all. Now this is odd looking, but essentially what's happening is it's still moving from point A to point B, but it's just going to teleport there, essentially. So let me play this so you can see. I'll also go play the linear so you can see that one as well. but this one's kind of interesting. And this does have practical uses. If you have like some kind of magic fantasy game, and like there's kind of like some kind of, I don't know, like orb light ball, and it just teleports all over the world for some whatever reason, this kind of constant would give you that kind of blinking effect. So what's going to happen is it's going to not do anything for 10 seconds, and then all of a sudden just teleport to where it's supposed to be. Bam! So there's that. So you can have like some nifty particle effects going on for that, like this magical door that just kind of teleports open. I don't know. It can work. Now let me switch this to linear, and I'll let you see that one. So notice how the other door kind of gradually opened up, and this one just went at a even pace, and it just kind of continues and then just stops all of a sudden. It's actually going slightly slower than the other door, but so that they can reach the same point at the same time, because the other door has to get up slowly to the speed that it wants, but this left door is already at the speed that it needs to be at. So there's like a small bit of compensation. So you can kind of see a difference when we have both of these doors set to something different. So you kind of watch both doors back and forth as we go through this again. So there we go. And then it's going to slow down, and the other one's going to not. And there we go. So there's a linear. There's kind of the difference between the two. Again, they're not terribly different, but there's a slight difference between the two that a person could pick up on if you have it all over your level. So, anyway. Now, the difference between auto and auto clamped, there's not much. I don't really know too much of the difference. From what I've been able to gather, what I've been told at least, is that auto clamped will kind of ensure this, whoops. Got to set both of these to auto clamped. There. So auto clamped is going to kind of ensure this nice like acceleration and deacceleration. Curve auto, sometimes it doesn't, like it still gives you a curve, but it's not. It may sometimes like overshoot, I guess. So it makes sure that it's got like in math terms, it makes sure that there's an asymptote, so that it can't actually go past the points of, the point A and the point B. But with the curve auto, there is no asymptotes. And for the non-math people, basically an asymptote is a line that the graph cannot be on because it's undefined at that point, and fanciness. So that's just the best way to really describe it, because we're looking at a graph. So at least that's from what I've been told. I mean, I've not really been able to see much of a difference between the two. If I clip curve here and then go and select curve here, it's not changing at all. So there's really not much of a difference. It's just kind of like it guarantees it being, there being an asymptote. I don't know. But at any rate, now I don't know what curve break does. I've not been able to figure that one out. Like I said, I don't use this too much, so I'm still a little new to this, but I'm not entirely sure what curve break does. Now, user is obviously the customization of it. So I could click this and it would revert back to what I made, that fancy overshoot thing before. But that's kind of about it, about all the different kinds of things that they do. Now, I mean, we can do flattened tangents to axis and straighten tangents and all that kind of thing that kind of help us out with some stuff as well, but that is pretty self-explanatory over what I've already showed you. Now, just for the sake of exampling, let's go to about halfway here, and I'm going to add another key point. Now, do note that when I've done this, it's positioned the key point for the object. Now, if I played this back, it would play exactly the same as before, because this key point is basically wherever the object's position is where the object is now supposed to be at this point in time. Hopefully that makes sense. Because with our other key point, with the last one, we had to move it to where we wanted it to end up. In this case, it's telling Matinee that, okay, the object needs to be here right now. And technically, the end key point, we could have had it animate 0 units. It would have just said, okay, first key point, end key point is stay where you are, so I'm going to animate you not moving at all. So really, this is just, we're not really doing anything. We could move this to wherever we want, and it would animate it from here to that, to wherever we moved it, and then from wherever we moved it back to the endpoint that we have set, and it would just have to speed it up to get it to where it needs to be in time. So setting these key points at certain particular moments throughout your animation can be sometimes helpful if you want to be able to have a spot to be able to future edit stuff. So hopefully that makes some sense, because I've used that before. Like I've set a key point at a certain point, and then used the snap feature to be able to get timing for something else. So you don't always have to actually have the key point doing something. You just have it there as a reference for time. In this case, halfway. But now, if you look at this curve editor, we have 4 points now. We have this one, we have this one, and we have this one. Now, this middle point, technically, we only have 3 because these two move together. Okay? But, it looks as if there's 4. So we can do like some weird fancy thing like this. So if we do this, whoops. So now what's going to happen is it's going to go, and then it's actually going to move backwards some, and then move down. So it kind of like hits a bump and goes, and then hits a bump, goes to the right, and then goes back to the left. Now if we made this more pronounced, notice how far to the right that this is going. And if I set it to here, it's now going infinitely far to the right, and then going all the way back to the left, infinitely far. So this would probably break your game if you left it like this, because this is just it's not infinitely far, but it's very, you can see that the thing is very slow. If I set this to view to all, I don't know if, it's not even working. So I have to zoom out. Right, this is like 50,000 units out. And is that the edge of it? Yes. So, okay, so around 74,700 units out. This is now starting to go back up. So really far, okay, not good thing to do this. So you want to make sure that you don't do that. But at any rate, you get the gist of this. So you can kind of just play around with it like this. Now, if you edit this top one up here and not this bottom one, you actually get a different, like, what's it called? You get a different curve, and this is just actually going in the Y direction. So if I don't know if I showed this. Yeah, so we got this like fancy dip now, and then it's going to go back to its original position. So you can also do that. So this one does not actually affect the line as a whole, but a whole different other curve. And note now that we actually also have this one too, because we have this point in the middle. So if we add other points along here, we just get more lines to be able to change it up in between these points. Now if we set this to linear, now we have a linear section from, now because I set this to linear, it just kind of just arbitrarily changed it to linear here. So if we set this one to linear, now it will be linear there, and we could set this one to, You set this one curve auto clamp. So there we go. So now that's set back to like it is. So like I said, before, sometimes you have to set multiple of them to different ones so that you can get the desired effect. But we got it easily enough. So it's going to accelerate at a linear rate and then slowly kind of then kind of stop, slowly accelerate, and then deaccelerate. And you could do the same thing with a constant. We could actually have it blink to 2 places. So let's actually try that. I keep saying blink, but it's just a constant thing. So we've got like this fancy thing, L shape going on here. But if we view this, we're going to actually have it blink twice. So bam. And fancy sound effect, whoosh. So that's that at work. So set it back to that, and you there. There we go. Okay, so that's back to normal. So that's kind of how that works. That's about all I can really show you that. I mean, that's about all there is to it. Though the next thing is actually adding a bit of sound to this, because sound is a little different in the way it works. So what we want to do, if we want this to actually be playing sound, because all of my tutorials have so far been completely silent, but there's just been no sound to play. Now there actually is some sound to play, so there's going to be other noises besides my voice. What we want to do first, though, is go ahead and make a sound track within the same folder, essentially, that we have this in. So this is why the folders are useful, because even if we, sometimes we can just have one movement track, or not movement track, but just one track. But in this case, we're adding multiple tracks, so we don't actually have to create a separate folder for this. We can just add it under the same door left folder. We can just go to New Soundtrack, and door right click, New Soundtrack. Now, there's multiple ways to be able to, in this particular instance of just making a door sound open close thing, there's probably 4 or 5 ways you could actually go about doing this. I'm going to show you a couple, just to be able to show you different ways of doing it, but just keep in mind that there's a lot of different ways to do this. There's 3 main ways, the others being extensions of the ways that I'm doing it, and just kind of combinations of it all. But anyway, we can actually just code it directly here in the matinee sequence, which is going to make sense a lot, but you're only really going to hear one of these at a time. So if we have them 2 opening sounds playing at the exact same time, we're really just going to have one cumulative open sound. It's not going to be just like a combination of the 2. It's just going to be one. What we need to do is go into the content browser and go to sound cues, deselect the static meshes, and there's 4 door sounds. This 5th one is one that I added manually, so you're not going to have this creaking door sound. You're just going to have these 4. If again, as long as you chose the game option for at the beginning of the download of UDK, the extra assets and stuff. So I want to play these. Just keep in mind that this is probably going to be rather loud, so you may want to turn your volume down just a little bit and go away. So you may want to turn your volume down just a little bit, just in case it's incredibly loud, because sometimes it'll be different volume than what I'm recording at on my computer. So I'm just going to click this, just heads up. So that wasn't too loud for me, luckily. So we have the close start cue, close stop cue, open start cue, and open stop cue. Now there's 4 of them, and they're really not all that different. They're slightly different. You can kind of tell a little bit. But what I'm going to be using, and these are kind of designed for you to be able to use them in conjunction with reversing it as well. So, like, you kind of have an open sound and basically an open sound from the closed position and an open sound from the open position, if that makes sense. So you have like separate sounds from it opening and closing at different spots. So that's why there's 4 of them. But I'm just going to use the open stop cue as the end and the open start cue as the beginning. So we do this one, and to place a sound in here, just select the actual sound track. I'm going to stick this at 0, and this is the open start cue. So all I have to do is hit enter, and it adds it in there for us. And that's just the soundtrack right there. Now, what we need to do is add this in, and just kind of click this, and then hold control. Well, no, that's not what I need to do at all. I need to select the other one. Then click over here. I'm just going to kind of add it in somewhere arbitrarily. And then I'm going to hold control and move this over some. But what I want to do is not that at all, because I'm doing it wrong. Actually add this to the very end so it plays whenever the door hits its stop point. Now I need to make sure that I actually move my animation out far enough where this is completely, okay, now this is important, completely enclosing this. If I set it to here and thinking, well, you know what, I don't want to really have a lot of extra, like I don't want to have a couple milliseconds of extra just time that my animation is playing, because I need to be able to get to the next action, and if this is playing, I can't get to the next, action while it's playing. Well, it's going to cut the sound short. It's going to stop it here, and the animation is going to be done. Bam. It's not going to play the rest of the sound, because I've tried this before, thinking that I could do it, but it just kind of cut the sound off. So you want to make sure that this is completely enclosing the sound. Now, it doesn't really matter that it's this short of a distance for the animation. Now, if you had like 5 seconds of just time where there's nothing happening in your animation, you want to try to trim that off, because that just means that you can't do the next thing in your Kismet sequence. And I'm talking about Kismet in a separate tutorial, but timing is everything when you're doing your Kismet sequences. So you want to make sure that you're not just having an extra 5 seconds in your in matinee animations that are just sitting there, because the player may be expecting another animation afterwards, and there's just a 5 seconds where nothing at all is happening in the level, and they're just sitting there like, okay, I'm expecting like lights to turn on after these doors open, and nothing's happening. So just keep that in mind whenever you're doing these. But now I'm going to go ahead and go up to this soundtrack real quick. Hit enter. There we go. And then I'm going to go grab the open start cue. Go up here. Hit enter. Okay. So now we've got this in here. So all I have to do now is essentially go to the play thing, move this over, and hit play. There we go. So there's our little door opening animation. Now you notice during the middle there's really no sound at all, and if there's these big powerful sounding motors running these doors, you would expect to hear some kind of noise. While there is some sounds that I could probably fiddle around with to make work, I'm not going to worry about doing that in this tutorial, because it would be the same thing that I've just done, just a little bit more in depth, because I'm having to customize some sounds to fit in here. And that's going to be in a separate tutorial on sounds anyway. Essentially, that's about all you need to really know. However, I kind of want to show you how to be able to make this actually activate in the level, because right now, there's no way to do that. We just kind of just have this animation sitting here, but there's no way to actually trigger this animation / cinematic thingy. So, I'm going to kind of make this brief. Before I do that, I want to show you a couple other ways to actually make the sound activate. If I go in here into the interp actor, you can see I have an opening. I have opening and closing sounds, multiple of them. So I can actually just click here and just use select object in the content browser by this green arrow, and it'll just use them that way. And so it can kind of use them in opening and closing. In this case, means the start of this object's movement and the end of this object's movement. Doesn't necessarily have to refer to a door. Just use opening and closing in this case, because it would be used frequently in the case of a door. So you can actually just access them right here. And I don't know, I think the interp actor is the only one that actually does this. I don't know if the K actor does or not. I'd have to look. But I know the interp actor, of course, that has this. So you can actually do it this way. You can actually also do it in Kismet. I'm not going to go into much detail about this, but you can go new action and then sound and do an apply a sound node, and then having a sound node and tied in there, and so you can actually stick it in front of the play and then after the completed. But it depends on how you want to do it. And I'll cover this specific method in my Kismet tutorial because that's a little more in depth into how Kismet works. But right now, I want to go ahead and briefly cover how to actually activate this in level. There's multiple ways of doing this. One of which, the one I'm actually going to use is on touch, meaning that whenever I get within a certain radius of these doors, they're going to just open automatically for me. Now, as I say, multiple ways to do this. I could do this by pressing a key on my keyboard, by clicking my mouse, by clicking something in a GUI screen, hundreds of other actions in the level. Some other cinematic that just finished playing, by shooting the doors. I don't know. You could do whatever you wanted. But for right now, I'm just going to make them activate by touch, because I don't want to get too much into Kismet. But at the same time, I want to give you enough information where you can kind of play around this with, on your own. Go to Add Actor, and then add a trigger right here. And you'll get this little fancy doohickey here. And you're not actually going to see this in the level, so don't worry too much about placing it in really intrusive spots on the player's vision. Because if I click the game mode view button right here, this goes away. So it's just kind of showing you the radius of this thing's detection. So this little green cylinder is where, if you step within that green cylinder, it's going to fire off. Now, you don't actually have to be completely in this green cylinder. You just have to walk in it somehow. So this doesn't really have to be that big, but I kind of like to make it a little bigger than necessary just for the looks of it, so it looks a little nicer. So you don't really have to make it this tall. Whoops. But it just kind of looks nicer. And I just kind of like the safety of actually making sure that it's tall enough to accept any height input, even from, because if you're jumping, you may accidentally jump over it or something. So I just kind of make it that high because it's as high as the door. So anyway, collision radius I'm going to set to 200 just for it to be nice and large to detect. Now again, we don't actually have to be fully inside this. Once we walk at it from one of these angles, it's going to instantaneously trigger. Once we get, sufficiently inside. Of course, the player's hitbox in this case is not very large, so we're already going to be completely inside of it by the time this fires anyway. So it doesn't really matter that much. But those are the only two options you really need to worry about at this moment on those particular in this trigger menu thing, is the collision height and the collision radius. So we can exit this. We can exit Matinee. We just need to make sure we actually still have this thing selected. So we do. Clicking Kismet, and then, whoops, drag this out just for looks real quick. Okay. And we're going to come over here with, now this is still selected. So right click, and then we have new object variable using trigger 1 and new event using trigger 1. We want to do new event using trigger 1 and then go to touch. And as you can see, there's a lot of other options that we can have it look for, but we want touched right now. So this is pretty simple to understand, and again, I'm going to go more in depth on this kind of stuff in a Kismet tutorial that's coming much, much later on whenever I have time. On this being touched, on something being inside of this, usually it's player, or something not being inside of this. So we could have this only open when the player's outside of it. So we could actually make this really, really large and have the player spawn inside of it so that they're always inside of it, and whenever they walk outside of it, maybe the door opens, but then when they walk back inside of it to get to the door, it closes again, just as like a weird brain psychotic thing we could do. So we could actually just have this like reverse animation on untouched or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, touch, we want to play. That's all we have to do. for that, then we actually have to go down here to the sequence event and set the max trigger count to 0. Otherwise, it'll only play one time. If we set it to 0, it'll play an infinite number of times. But if we set it to 5, we can only activate it 5 times, and it wouldn't activate anymore. So if your trigger's not working right, make sure that the trigger count is set to 0 just for testing purposes, because a lot of the time that will be your major reason for it not working. So now if we go in here and we come generally close to this, there we go. We have a door that is opening for us. So that's pretty cool. Pretty fun to play around with, I think. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this tutorial. And I do apologize it took me so long to come out with this one from my previous one. But I've had a lot of stuff I've had to be doing. So, at any rate, again, hope you have enjoyed. And I'll see you guys in another video.